Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we cut through the noise, synthesize the most compelling market data, and really hand you the insights that are defining what's next.
And today, we have a big one.
We really do. Today, we're strapping in for what might be one of the most, dramatic financial analyses we've done all year. We're looking right at the foundations of the AI revolution.
Right at the very heart of it.
Yeah, and specifically at this 12-day period in November, which suggests that for the perceived industry leader, the party might just be over. We are zeroing in on why OpenAI, the company that basically launched this whole modern era of generative AI, is now being positioned right at the epicenter of a massive looming bubble collapse.
And, this isn't just about stock prices going up and down or some short-term competitive setback. What we're analyzing today is a fundamental shift. It's a structural change in the tech paradigm itself.
An extinction-level event.
For some business models, yes. For business models that were based on brute force scale and, unlimited money. Because two specific launches, back-to-back in November, one about cost, the other about pure performance, they have basically made the old rules of the game obsolete.
Okay, so let's lay out the mission for this deep dive. It's pretty clear. We're synthesizing a whole stack of reports and analyses, and we're focusing on the aftermath of two key moments. First, Moonshot AI's release of Kimi K2 Thinking on November 6th.
And then Google's launch of Gemini 3, just 12 days later on November 18th. Exactly. So we need to unpack the cold, hard data from these launches and answer the critical question. Why is OpenAI, a company valued in the tens of billions, the company that's been dominating headlines for years, why is it now being flagged by analysts as the single biggest potential casualty of a market correction? A correction that, and this is the crazy part, Sam Altman himself seems to have predicted.
That's the perfect place to start, actually, because we should frame this whole discussion with his words. Before either of these world-changing models even came out, Sam Altman made some very pointed comments.
I remember this. He said he didn't think there was a huge, indiscriminate AI bubble about to pop across the whole sector. He still believes the tech itself is real, it's transformative. Yes, but, and this is the crucial part, he made a qualification. He suggested that some of the major players, the ones with the most aggressive valuations, the biggest capital commitments, were, and I'm quoting here, poised to lose a whole lot of money. Which is just a remarkable statement to hear now, with hindsight. When he said that, the assumption across the entire investment world was still pretty simple. You throw enough cash, enough GPUs, enough data at the problem, and you win. You build the best model. Scale was everything. Scale was the moat.
And it sounds like November 2024 proved that scale is now a liability, an anchor.
Precisely. Before those 2 dates in November, we were all kind of guessing. Who would the big losers be? Maybe some of the second-tier cloud companies, the ones with shaky data.
Yeah.
But once the metrics from Kimi and Gemini 3 came in, all that fog just cleared.
And the numbers pointed somewhere specific.
They pointed, with stark clarity, to the player that defined that very era of massive scale. So what here? The big takeaway as we jump into our first section is that these new models gave us irrefutable proof that the foundational assumptions OpenAI was built on, this idea that you need colossal, unchecked investment, are now technologically outdated and maybe strategically bankrupting. The panic among investors is real, and it's all driven by the metrics.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's start with that first seismic shift. We're calling it the cost revolution. And it all started with a 2-year-old startup from China, Moonshot AI, and their open-sourced model, Kimi K2 Thinking. This is the model that introduced the world to the demassification of AI.
And that term, demassification of AI, is so important for understanding the cost pressure that's now just crushing the incumbents. Demassification, as we define it, is this radical decoupling of modern performance from infrastructural scale and massive spending.
So the old belief was, what? A model that's 10 times bigger is 10 times better, and that's going to cost you billions.
Right. Kimi K2 Thinking just completely obliterated that relationship.
This is why the financial comparison isn't just an interesting data point. It's lethal. We really have to highlight the staggering disparity in the training costs here because it sets the whole stage for this crisis.
Let's just state the numbers plainly, because the size of the gap is the whole problem.
Yeah.
Kimi K2 Thinking, this super efficient open source model, was trained on less than $5 million.
$5 million.
$5 million. And to be clear, we're not talking about, salaries or office space. We are talking specifically about the cost of compute to train the foundation model, the GPU time, the energy, the raw computational force. $5 million.
Which, as you said, in the world of frontier AI models, that is pocket change. It's less than a rounding error on some of these budgets. Now let's compare that to the estimated cost of training OpenAI's latest model, GPT-5. The sources we're looking at put that number between $1.5 billion and $2 billion.
So let's just take the conservative number. Let's say it was only $1.5 billion. So $1.5 billion versus $5 million, you're staring at a cost ratio of 300 to 1.
300 to 1.
That means for every single dollar Moonshot AI spent to get this high-performing model, OpenAI had to spend $300.
Yeah.
And for what? To achieve what we used to think was state-of-the-art. That 300 to 1 ratio isn't just a difference in budgets. It signals a catastrophic failure of capital efficiency, a colossal miscalculation about how these things actually work.
But the key detail, the thing that makes this a market killer, is that the $5 million model wasn't just cheap. If it had been cheap and, terrible, nobody would care.
Exactly. And the data is crystal clear on this. Kimi K2 Thinking wasn't just competent. It was a high-performance model that actively outperformed major billion-dollar competitors, including GPT-5 and others like Grok 4, Gemini 2.5, and Claude 4, on many of the most important benchmarks, especially for enterprise use.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second. Think about what that means for your business strategy if you're a high-valuation company. You've just spent $1.5 billion, and a 2-year-old startup comes along, spends $5 million, and their product is demonstrably better in a lot of really critical areas. I mean, how is that even possible?
Well, it points to this deep, almost religious belief that OpenAI and others had in the scaling laws doctrine. The idea that bigger is always better, that more data, more parameters, it just solves everything.
Just add more zeros to the check.
Right. But Moonshot AI, they likely used much more sophisticated techniques. Things like sparse modeling, highly curated synthetic data, advanced memory optimization. They found a smarter path. They proved that intelligent, targeted effort can completely trump brute force scale. They basically found a shortcut to the same performance plateau, or in some cases, an even higher one.
So now the secret's out. The cat is out of the bag. The main threat here isn't necessarily Moonshot AI itself as a single company, but the lesson they just taught the entire market.
The industry now knows, with what our sources are calling absolute certainty, that a small, agile lab working with minimal funds can overtake the established giants. This doesn't just, take away the competitive mode of scale. It fundamentally changes how investors think.
Why would a VC fund a model that needs $500 million when Kimi just proved you can reach peak performance for $5 million?
You wouldn't. It changes the entire financial calculus. And this inefficiency, it carries over directly into the operational costs. And that's where the pain really becomes acute for the customers.
Right, because training is a one-time cost, but running the model is forever.
The inference cost is perpetual. And because these efficient demassified models are lighter, they're smaller, they consume fewer resources every time you ask them a question, they cost consumers and enterprises from 2 to 10 times less to run than the massive high overhead models from OpenAI.
2 to 10 times less. Okay, so let's translate that. Imagine you're a big bank or a logistics company. You're running thousands of queries an hour on OpenAI's API. You're paying X amount. Now, a new company comes along with a model that performs a little better on your specific tasks, and they can cut your bill by 75%.
The switch is immediate. It's just a rational economic decision. There's no loyalty there.
So this puts OpenAI in an impossible position.
A completely impossible choice. They either have to slash their prices by 50% or more to compete on cost, which means they start hemorrhaging revenue and immediately justify that losing a lot of money prediction.
Or they hold their prices steady and just watch their customers walk away to cheaper, better alternatives.
They're pinned between their own cost inefficiency on one side and now performance inferiority on the other.
It's a classic innovator's dilemma, but it's playing out in hyperspeed, like over the course of weeks, not years. So Kimi K2 Thinking basically redefined the cost curve. It proved that efficiency is the dominant factor now, but, efficiency alone, that might not be enough to completely tank a giant. The real knockout punch, which came just 12 days later, showed that the old leader wasn't just too expensive. They were also kind of technologically obsolete. And the market was still just reeling from the Kimi news when the other shoe dropped. Which sets up our next section perfectly. This shift from cost efficiency to just absolute undeniable performance dominance, which brings us right to the launch of Google's Gemini 3 on November 18th. And the language used in the analysis of this launch is called It's intense. The source doesn't just say Google put out a good model. They declare that Gemini 3 massively leapfrogged over every other AI by an historic margin.
The summary statement is even more brutal. It said Google just ate OpenAI's lunch, dinner, and breakfast the next day. And, that aggression in the analysis, it's warranted by the data. If Kimi proved you could get to the top of the mountain cheaply, Gemini 3 proved that the mountain was dramatically higher than anyone even expected. It set what they called monstrous new highs, especially when it was using its most powerful setting, which they call deep think mode.
Okay, so let's define deep think mode for everyone listening. This isn't just about it being faster, right?
No, not at all. Deep think mode refers to a longer, more resource-intensive process. It's for complex, high-value tasks that, frankly, generate the most enterprise revenue. It means model takes more time, uses more compute. It literally thinks harder to get to a high-quality, verifiable answer. It prioritizes accuracy and complex reasoning over just spitting something out instantly.
So it's designed specifically to dominate the tests that measure real intelligence, not just memorization.
Exactly. It's for complex problem solving. This is where the money is, in verifiable complex reasoning, and the metrics that came out really highlight this massive performance gap.
So what were they? What are the specific numbers?
We really have to focus on two benchmarks that were designed to measure this frontier intelligence. The first is called Humanity's Last Exam. It's a test for generalized scientific and philosophical reasoning under new, constrained conditions. On that, Gemini 3 scored an astounding 37.5%.
Okay. And the second one?
The second is RRC-AGI-2. That one measures abstract, algorithmic problem solving. So, the ability to generalize concepts from just a few examples. Here, Gemini 3 hit 45.1%.
So those numbers, 37.5% and 45.1%. They sound like grades on a really, really hard test. But what makes them so significant in the competitive landscape? Why is that a bombshell?
The context is everything. The sources explicitly state that these scores, which were achieved in deep think mode, nearly doubled GPT-5 on both measures.
Double.
Nearly doubled.
Yeah.
Moving from a baseline score to almost double that in one single generation, that's not an incremental gain. That's not a 10 or 20% improvement. That is a genuine technological leapfrog. It suggests that Google's underlying architecture, maybe something to do with their deep integration with their custom chips or their internal knowledge graphs, is just fundamentally more advanced at reasoning than what OpenAI has right now.
That is a staggering indictment of the whole premise that just throwing more money at the old architecture would keep giving you better results. It really seems like Google found a completely new way to calculate the answer.
That's the implication. I mean, when you double the score on generalized intelligence metrics, you were signaling a paradigm shift. OpenAI could maybe close a 10% gap in 6 months, but a 100% gap? That means they probably need to scrap their entire current development pipeline and start over from scratch, assuming they could even figure out what Google did, which is all proprietary.
And it wasn't just limited to those two key intelligence tests, right? Gemini 3 was dominant across the board.
Absolutely. It proved it's a robust, generalized model that's ready for demanding enterprise clients. So, for example, look at competitive reasoning. There's a system called the Elmarina ELO system. It's rigorous. It mimics human debate and problem solving. Gemini 3 scored 1501 ELO on that. That puts it squarely in the expert range.
And what about for things like science and finance, where you can't have mistakes?
Right. Scientific knowledge verification. This is crucial for pharma, for engineering. Using a very demanding benchmark called GPQA Diamond, it scored 91.9%.
Let's just stay on GPQA Diamond for a moment, because this is where that aha moment about reliability really happens. Why is a 91.9% score there so much more meaningful than, say, a high score on an older science test?
Because those older tests, they often just rewarded simple memorization. The models would just match patterns they saw during training, which led to a high degree of hallucination. Answers that sound plausible but are just plain wrong. GPQA Diamond is designed specifically to prevent that. It forces the model to perform verifiable, step-by-step scientific reasoning. It has to synthesize information from different fields and show it truly understands the principles. A score of 91.9% means that this model is highly resistant to making up facts in high-stakes scientific or technical situations. So to put it all together, Gemini 3 has basically conquered the three pillars of high-value AI for business: strategic reasoning, verifiable scientific knowledge, and abstract problem solving. Absolutely. It's a comprehensive gap. It's not just a parlor trick. It's a demonstration that on the metrics that matter most for selling multi-million-dollar licenses to the world's biggest companies, reliability, truthfulness, advanced reasoning, OpenAI is now dramatically behind.
If the performance gap is really that wide, I mean, nearly doubling on key metrics, what does that do to the time horizon? Can OpenAI even catch up in the next year? Is that realistic?
The source analysis paints a very, very stark picture here. It says these scores position Gemini 3 way ahead, perhaps years ahead of OpenAI, on the metrics that are going to define the future.
Years ahead. Think of it this way. To close a gap of this size, OpenAI doesn't just need to release GPT-6. They need to release what would have been GPT-8, but they need to do it now. They need to skip several generations of development. And that requires a kind of technological pivot that is just incredibly difficult for a big company that's already committed to a certain architectural path. And this kind of analysis, this isn't just anonymous market chatter. There's real data behind this.
Correct. It's deeply rooted in documented performance evaluations. The source specifically points to a blog post from Vellum AI, noting that it has a brutally detailed account of how completely Gemini 3 trounced OpenAI and pretty much everyone else on pretty much everything. So the panic in the market, it isn't speculative. It's driven by established, documented performance gaps vetted by third-party analysts. The competition is just operating on a whole new technological plane. Okay, so we've established the external pressures. A small startup proved OpenAI's cost model is catastrophically inefficient. A massive rival proved their performance ceiling is dramatically lower than the new state-of-the-art. So now we have to shift our focus to Section 3, the financial trap. Because the external competition is only half the story. It's the internal decisions, the financial vulnerabilities at OpenAI, that make them uniquely susceptible to a collapse. This is the part that turns technological obsolescence into a full-blown financial catastrophe. The leadership at OpenAI, they made these foundational miscalculations based on assumptions of a continued monopoly and linear scale. Assumptions that were proven wrong before the ink was even dry on their biggest investment commitments.
So let's dive into those flaws. The report identified some big ones in OpenAI's 5-year revenue projections, and these were calculated before Kimi and Gemini 3 changed the world. Let's start with the first two problems.
Okay, the first core problem is that the revenue projections, which were, essential for justifying their absolutely massive valuation, they were based on products that do not yet exist. This is the ultimate risk of building a financial model on vaporware.
Right. In a normal industry, maybe you can project revenue for a product 18 months out.
Maybe. But in AI, the underlying technology shifts every 6 months. So when you bet your entire future valuation on hypothetical products, and then the technological paradigm shifts, like it did on November 6th and 18th, your entire projected revenue stream can just disappear overnight because the foundation those products were supposed to be built on is now flawed.
And even if they could build those promised products, the second problem is demand. Who is going to buy them?
Exactly. No one has yet created the mass market demand for these future products. Yes, we have massive demand for ChatGPT, for DALL-E, for simple enterprise APIs. But these multi-trillion-dollar valuations, they require brand new, complex, currently non-existent AI applications to be adopted at a massive scale, instantly, at a huge price point.
So you're betting on two things at once. You're betting the technology will show up and that the market will immediately adopt it at the price you need. It's a double gamble.
A double gamble that's incredibly precarious, especially when your competition is simultaneously offering something that's either way better or way cheaper. And that brings us to the third flaw.
Which, in the context of this whole discussion, is truly damning.
The third flaw is that OpenAI apparently did not factor in the competition. When your revenue projections assume you are going to be the sole undisputed leader at the frontier, you're pricing in monopoly profits. You assume no one is going to undercut your price by 10x. You assume no one is going to double your performance squall. And then when Gemini 3 and Kimi K2 Thinking show up, those monopoly profits, they just evaporate instantly.
And this leads us right to the heart of the financial trap. This colossal, almost unbelievable commitment of a staggering $1.4 trillion in investments, earmarked for building massive proprietary data centers. This is where the paper losses of a bursting bubble become potentially catastrophic real-world capital commitments.
That number, 1.4 trillion, it's just breathtaking. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the GDP of a country like Spain. The analysis sees it as a massive misappropriation of capital, based entirely on that outdated assumption that scale equals success.
What is even in that number? It can't just be buying GPUs from NVIDIA.
No. This commitment covers multiple long-term capital projects that they thought were necessary to build their moat. We're talking dedicated proprietary chip fabrication plants, unique cooling solutions for ultra-dense server clusters, securing huge amounts of land, and long-term energy contracts, building specialized physical security for these massive facilities. All of this was seen as necessary to maintain that capital moat.
And the timing of this commitment is what makes the whole situation so disastrous. This investment, this $1.4 trillion, it won't even be fully operational for years.
That time delay is the crux of the whole problem. They committed all this capital assuming the scaling laws would hold true forever, and that this infrastructure would be a prerequisite for the next generation of AI. But then the Kimi K2 Thinking launch came along and just fundamentally undermined the entire premise.
It proves you don't need it.
It proved that these massive, proprietary, hyper-expensive data centers are, quote, just not necessary to build and operate the most powerful, or at least highly competitive, AIs.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? OpenAI spent years convincing the world their valuation was justified because they were the only ones who could raise this much capital and build this kind of infrastructure. And now they are shackled to that exact infrastructure while the rest of the market pivots to models that prioritize efficiency over sheer scale.
It's an investment in an obsolete paradigm. It's like a company building the world's largest, most expensive system of canals and locks years after the invention of the railroad. The investment isn't just poorly timed. It represents stranded assets on a scale we've never seen before. So the ultimate risk is all right here. Poor forecasting, a complete failure to account for competition, and this staggering commitment of $1.4 trillion to infrastructure that is already potentially obsolete. This is why the analysis says OpenAI has positioned itself to be the big loser in the AI bubble Altman himself warned about. They are facing the perfect financial and technological pincer movement. They have to achieve a massive leap in performance just to catch up to Gemini 3, but at the same time, they have to slash their prices by 2 to 10 times to compete with Kimi K2 Thinking. And they have to do all of this while servicing and justifying a $1.4 trillion debt and infrastructure liability that the market has just shown it no longer needs for peak performance.
That's the part. Well, that debt has stopped being a competitive moat and has become a colossal strategic anchor, just dragging the company straight down. Exactly. This level of pressure, it demands we look forward. Let's move into our conclusion and outlook and try to synthesize this three-pronged attack. OpenAI is being simultaneously cost undercut and performance leapfrog, all while being uniquely financially exposed by a commitment to unnecessary scale.
And the urgency is real. The source gives us a very specific timeline for a potential catastrophe. It suggests that if OpenAI doesn't pull a rabbit out of the hat during 2026, it may become the first and possibly the most spectacular major casualty of this looming AI bubble.
That gives them a very small window, less than 2 years to fundamentally overturn the competitive metrics that have just been defined by two completely different rivals.
A very small window. So let's explore that phrase. Pull a rabbit out of the hat. I mean, in the face of Gemini 3's performance and Kimi's cost revolution, what monumental, unforeseen innovation would even constitute that rabbit? Well, it can't be an incremental improvement. It can't be just adding more parameters to the next model. It would have to be a complete technological pivot, a massive, defensible advantage that only the scale of their committed investment could leverage.
So something that makes that $1.4 trillion necessary again.
Exactly. Perhaps it's the discovery of a form of, AGI that requires some kind of proprietary hardware or a novel chip architecture that only their specialized data centers can house and power. It would need to be an application so critical and so specialized that it just bypasses the need to compete on general intelligence benchmarks or on price.
Like, for instance, maybe they achieve true multimodal reasoning handling video, sound, text, physical robotics integration at a level so advanced that Google or Moonshot AI would need years to catch up, and that complexity only works on their proprietary stack.
That's the kind of innovation we're talking about, something that suddenly makes massive scale essential again. They have to create a new competitive moat that is secured by that $1.4 trillion. Because if they only manage to create a GPT-6 that's, say, 20% better than GPT-5, they are still years behind Gemini 3 and still massively overcosted compared to Kimi. The market is demanding a technological miracle that retroactively justifies an obsolete investment.
The cautiously optimistic note from the sources, though, suggests that this impending AI bubble collapse driven by these realities may hopefully be limited to just these colossal, unwise investments like OpenAI's.
And if that holds true, the wider AI ecosystem, the nimble startups like Moonshot AI, the big tech players with superior architecture like Google, they might be able to weather the storm. But still, the unwinding of a $1.4 trillion capital commitment would be seismic. It would represent a profound loss of investor confidence and a major reevaluation of all large-scale tech investments globally. It would certainly redefine the meaning of frontier.
It forces us to redefine what frontier even means. It might not mean the biggest investment anymore. It might mean the most efficient investment.
Exactly. The frontier has shifted from brute force scale to highly optimized architecture. The most valuable player is no longer the one who spends the most. It's the one who spends the smartest.
For their sake, let's hope that $1.4 trillion buys them a really, really big rabbit. And that leaves us with the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If performance superiority has already been claimed by Google and cost efficiency has already been claimed by Moonshot AI, what specific unforeseen innovation could possibly constitute that rabbit for OpenAI?
What kind of technology, what kind of breakthrough could possibly justify spending $1.4 trillion making infrastructure that currently looks obsolete suddenly essential again, while also beating the best, smartest models on the planet? The question we all have to consider is, what specific benefit can $1.4 trillion buy you that $5 million cannot, when the $5 million model is already performing better than your current product? The answer to that profound question won't just define OpenAI's future. It's going to define the entire capital structure of the next decade of technology. That's the deep dive for today. Thank you for joining us as we dissect these forces that are converging right on the heart of the AI market. We'll see you next time.